Welcome back to DevRev, everyone. I'm your host, Conor Bronsdon, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dheeraj Pandey. Dheeraj is the CEO and co-founder of DevRev, a unicorn, and he's the former CEO of Nutanix, which he led to a $16 billion valuation and a successful IPO. Dheeraj's entrepreneurial journey goes from Nutanix to DevRev, and is marked by innovation and a deep understanding of how AI has transformed businesses already and how it can transform business operations moving forward. Today, we're going to discuss his approach, the lessons he's learned, and how he's applying a design-led approach to AI at DevRev to build that unicorn company and challenge giants like Salesforce and Jira. Excited to talk about his counter-positioning and understand more about that. Dheeraj, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Conor. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on because it's always great to learn from entrepreneurs like yourself who've not only led one successful company, but now are doing it again because there are clearly repeatable lessons and things you've learned along your journey. But before we dive into some of those lessons and your approach, I do want to remind our listeners, I know they hate to hear it from me every week, but if you're enjoying this episode, if you like guests like Dheeraj, if you want to learn more about these kind of topics, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on your podcasting app of choice, whether that's Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, Apple Podcasts. These ratings and reviews are how people find the show, and they matter a lot. It's an immense help. We deeply appreciate hearing from you, our listeners. With that said, though, we're going to dive into the content. Dheeraj, you built Nutanix into a $16 billion company, and now you've founded DevRev and its valuation that sounds like is unicorn status. Not to mention, you've also been a board member at Adobe, you're a former VP of engineering and much more. What inspired you to pull away from all these other successes and build DevRev?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. That 16 billion has been a labor of love for a lot of people. Timing-wise, it just happened to be at the right time and right place. Obviously, I had two other co-founders who also built great companies over time. And just the folks who've actually been doing it ever since I left about 3.5 years ago. So it's taken a village to build that. When I was doing my first company in 2009, the itch was there. I figured that there's a little bit of an intuition, the gut about really going and building products that people like. There's a really good article in The Economist in 2015 when Satya was taking over Microsoft. And, they talked a lot about humility and fierce resolve that really made Microsoft, maybe 40 years into its journey. And one of the big things they talked about is how they said, look, we're going to have to build things that people like, as opposed to put this strategy tax of Windows and Windows Phone and like everything has to be built here. Like, no, we got to really build apps that people might actually like on their operating systems. And to me, that was telling because it just spoke volumes about, first of all, what it takes to reinvent yourself, but also how market is king. The market is king. There's nothing more powerful than the market. It's like the ocean, and you don't go and surf on the ocean against the tide. You need to actually be with the tide. So in 2009, that journey was about building distributed systems for the masses, because distributed systems were still confined to consumer cloud and cloud companies who were trying to do this within their own premises. But it said, if you have to really take this and democratize it, what would it take? And that's what Nutanix is all about. Like, if you have to democratize distributed systems, what it meant to have people not buy proprietary expensive hardware, is there a way to do this? And there was a killer app. That killer app was virtualization. And, we didn't know much about virtualization, and we learned everything about virtualization and what it means to take physical machines into the realm of virtual and build a great, delightful experiences on top of it. Now, the first 5 years in Nutanix, the product was very difficult, like really, really hard, because we were embracing commodity servers, commodity hardware, the things that the public cloud folks were comfortable with, because they didn't have to ship all this stuff to anybody else's premises. We had to ship all this stuff to somebody else's premises. And then we had to support this remotely, as opposed to the way the public cloud companies or the consumer cloud companies were doing it with tons of people. I think that was the hard part. Of course, VMware as a layer of an operating system underneath us was also really hard because they had never seen as big an app as what we had actually come to build about data management and distributed systems on top of VMware. So the way we had to compensate for that difficulty, the fact that the product was actually fragile was through customer support. We said, look, we got to really bring in the human element to this technological breakthrough that we're trying to actually achieve in the market. And this yin and yang was great. Product work with customers, was this yin and yang, and customer support was about being customer centric. Leading with technology was about being product led. And I just, realized that we had to do this differently than what was about ticketing. Like, okay, customer support is not just about ticketing. It's really about an end-to-end collaboration between the market, the end users, the buyers, and, the support people, but also product managers and developers. So what does it mean to create this real-time highway between the end users and the developers and everybody else in the middle? We used a lot of Slack. In 2014, we were one of the earliest users of saying, okay, let's do real-time collaboration. We did almost $7-8 billion in those 8 years of selling between 2012 and 2020. And almost half of it came from a handful of customers, hundreds of customers, And to really do that, we had to build this, sort of collaboration superhighway, and way more than what support tools had ever done. So we built this along the way. Our net promoter score was very high, 90 plus for 7 years. And so when COVID hit, I'm like, okay, this thing is here to stay. This idea of digitization and making things more invisible is here to stay. More and more things on-prem will actually end up in the public cloud. What is the one thing that all this will mean? And I'm like, okay, we've learned so much about customer support in the last 11, 12 years of when I was building Nutanix. Let's make this into an operating system. What does it mean for every company to be as customer-centric as we were? And remember, we were dealing with big behemoths, and this was a $100 to $200 billion infrastructure market that had established competitors. And the way we dealt with not just making the product very easy to use, but also making customer-centric, customer service so delightful. We said, you got to really make this into an operating system. And that's how came DevRev. Obviously, timing is everything. We figured the killer app for AI is customer support. And yet we couldn't be a bolt-on on top of existing systems. We had to really go and do this fundamentally differently with cloud native and AI native principles.
It's really interesting you mentioned that bolt-on principle, because it seems like a lot of companies today are taking a bolt-on approach to AI instead of building from first principles and having AI embedded within the design from the ground up. And you very much have taken the opposite approach, it seems.
Yeah. And look, when we were building our last company, we knew that if there's no friction, there's no market. You can be building a quick $30, $40, $50 million company, but if you have to go above 100 million, most of these companies become one of those companies like, now what? Like, where's the TAM? They're looking down the barrel and there's nothing to be found because they didn't go and displace something. You don't just create new categories and new markets, which are accretive in terms of budget and overall everything is infinite. No, you've got to displace something and then make it better as well. So this idea of a system of record was very key to us. And when we were doing this in around 2012, 2015, 2016, that whole era, this idea of hyperconvergence, where we're trying to converge a lot of things in pure software, there's lots of Me Too companies that were just saying, let's not take the big problem head on, which is displacing incumbents. We can't because it's too risky. And by the way, anyway, the exit that we are really pursuing is kind of being acquired by one of these bigger guys. And we said, no, we got to really take this. And only two companies survived. We and Pure Storage were the two companies that survived this because we said we got to go displace incumbents. And this time around, we had to do the same thing. It's not just a system of intelligence that is a bolt-on on top of some system of engagement that's a bolt-on on top of a big system of record where the real money sinks in the system of record. It's kind of the hardware of business software. So we had to really take all these three layers, the system record layer, we have to go displace enough Zendesk, enough Salesforce Service Cloud, enough Atlassian Service Desk and so on. We have to go and displace these things and then bring engagement and intelligence on top of. That's the only way to build $1 billion revenue company.
This is great stuff because it's really clear that your experience building a $1 billion revenue company at Nutanix has really shaped your approach to DevRev. Not only did it inspire your journey there, saying, "Hey, I think customer support is a huge opportunity. There's more opportunity for end-to-end experiences. We need to engage everyone with the customer," and also like, "Hey, let's integrate this incoming technology wave." But you've learned these other key lessons that I'm hearing from you as an entrepreneur, like that responsiveness to the markets, that deep focus on customers and on your product. Like I'm sure we've heard the Jeff Bezos quote everywhere. What are you doing to make your beer taste better?
Uh-huh.
Or I'm
Uh-huh.
paraphrasing. What are some of the other key lessons you've learned along your entrepreneurial journey that folks who are listening in the audience who are maybe thinking about becoming entrepreneurs or are first-time entrepreneurs and are trying to level up? What can they learn from you?
Well, I think a big piece of this is people. How do you really don't shortchange people along the way? Because, the people you employ, they're also the market. And the market knows more than you think they know. This is equally true for product quality, authentic customer service. All this stuff is about realizing that, you can't just go twist market in your direction. You can't just go and shortchange them. And people, employees are like that as well. You have to be very authentic with that. You need to know how to let go of things. Letting go of things is one of the hardest things that entrepreneurs struggle with. I struggled with this too. One thing we did well was hire good leaders and create new leaders. Also young leaders. They didn't have to be folks who were just with immense amounts of experience, because sometimes it's very hard for them to reset themselves, to roll up their
Mm.
sleeves and really, work on a new brand, build a new brand. It takes a lot to build a new brand from scratch. So knowing what it means to balance the fountain of youth with the excellence of experience, all this stuff needs to come together. I think the most important thing, though, is how do you weave work and life together? Because many times I see entrepreneurs really swing the pendulum too much to one side, or sometimes it's just a lifestyle business. Both of these don't work out in the long haul. It is a marathon. You got to really deal with a lot of paradoxes, and work and life are just one such paradox. But in the short term versus long term, it's people that you bring from outside who are leaders, but they come with different biases. Some of them really are about short horizons, small horizons. The other ones are long horizons, and you need to really make them work together well with each other. I think the most important thing, though, is people have to realize that at the end of the day, whether you build a small company or build a large company, it's equally hard. It just takes as much time to build a small company as it takes to build a large company. So my bias is go work on something that's big enough. And you might think that you don't have the technological prowess and the talent that you need, but if you don't have that ambition, you'll probably never build anything that really is really market defining. I think we learned a lot about systems. I can tell you that as a CEO myself, I was personally involved in so many decisions in systems. And systems to me is culture, not just Slack, not just Vmail, and not just GitHub, but there's a lot more to it than just that. I was very involved in choosing our ERP system. For example, NetSuite was our system of choice for us. And within a couple of years, SAP came knocking on the door saying, hey, you'll run out of steam with NetSuite because it was not built for anything above $100 billion. And we has made it work. It's still running at $2.4 billion annual revenue of Nutanix. NetSuite is still running because we actually put a system of engagement of Slack and bots on top of it that manages and everyone log in. Same thing with customer support. We said we got to really build our own. We didn't use Zendesk or Service Cloud. They built our own because data mattered, telemetry mattered, search mattered, analytics mattered. If anything, I think one of the things that we've done at DevRel is to really think about, okay, so what's the operating system on top of which we'll build these next generation apps? Support is one of them. We build product management, we build software development, we're going to build sales, relationship management with customers and buyers and sellers, all this stuff. But if the underlying operating system is not capable of delivering great search, great analytics, great workflows, I think you're building a cheaper, faster mousetrap, which the market is very little patient for. Honestly, you can build a cheaper, faster something for the SMB, but the moment you go to mid-market and the enterprise, I think the bar is really, really high. So the one last thing I'll say on building, the hard things about hard things is how do we go up market, and we can delve deeper into the mid-market and the enterprise, and the requirements that actually come from that. Because it probably just as hard to build an SMB company as it means to build a mid-market and enterprise company.
It's interesting you bring up this idea of, is your problem big enough and are you solving enough? Because I think there are plenty of folks who are listening who are saying, hey, look, I have a small app that I run on the side. It makes me a bit of money and I'm happy with it. I don't need to scale it out. But there is such a difference in approach when you do want to scale to a Nutanix level, to a DevRev level. And so this like philosophical piece of it that you're kind of alluding to here is really important. And I know this also correlates to how you think about designing for scale and designing for AI-driven scale. Can you dive a bit more into how you have approached that from your product philosophy side of things and how you and your co-founders are approaching scaling up to that next level?
Yeah, scale is a really interesting topic. And if you didn't weave architecture early on, then it's really hard to scale. Manoj and I, I've known Manoj for 30 years. He was with me at Nutanix for about 7.5 years as well. And he and I would talk a lot about this. Obviously, people is a part of it, process is a part of it, but product equally so. SaaS 2.0, as we call it, doesn't have to take sides between the enterprise and the SMB or the startup. There's a false dichotomy between PLG and SLG. At the end of the day, even when you're doing sales-led distribution, the fact that you have a zero-touch product will be great, because now in the large enterprise, in the large enterprise, there's lots of small teams as well who want to do shadow IT, who want to go and make autonomous decisions under the radar of what IT is. So thinking about an architecture that could equally scale for the freemium as much as it actually scales for the large companies was very important to us. And the way we build this cloud-native solution was at the core of this. We said, look, we have to have a budget for every small tenant. We can't spend more than tens of cents on AWS for these small tenants. And that meant the way we carved out our multi-tenant architecture for the tenant, whether it's a big tenant or a small tenant, we had to do it in a way that was not lackadaisical. Because sometimes you can actually make these major decisions about architecture that eventually go on to have you make this false choice that, look, now my product is only built for the large segment of the market, because the underlying cost of goods shipped, the COGS, is so high that I can't really go and cater to the similar market. And by the way, that segment is important because that's how the word of mouth grows. So if you want an efficient go-to-market over time, look at Snowflake, look at AWS, look at Slack, all these companies, they had to build both ends of the market well. If anything, the product-led motion, delivers warm seats that eventually salespeople can go and call into and say, hey, I heard that you've been using our product. It's been great. You've been spending all this money on a credit card. Let's go and show you the enterprise way as well, because now you're big enough for a salesperson to actually call you. So that architecture where you're really looking at the two ends of the spectrum and saying, can I build a next generation company, which is a SaaS 2.0 company that caters to both ends of the market? And that's why design matters in all of this. And the way you design your product is the way your go-to-market will actually be executed as well. I think in many ways, the last 20 years of SaaS, they didn't have to worry about knowledge discovery, for example. Search was not their problem because Google had not built something good enough for SaaS companies to deliver search. Analytics was not their problem. It's like, no, well, now IT will take care of it. And, building a great workflow engine was not their problem because integration was not their cup of tea. Integrating was IT's problem. So search was an IT's problem. Analytics was an IT's problem, and workflows, i.e. integration, were IT's problems. And we just said, look, in the next 20 years of SaaS, it better do more. It has to do more. Just like SaaS 1.0 did a lot for the market, they had to left shift a lot of the complexity and said, look, IT is struggling with just building hardware, data centers, upgrade cycles, software patching, all this stuff. We will do all that for you. And you know what? We deliver APIs that you can now use where you don't have to worry about the mundaneness of doing all this stuff. SaaS 2.0 has a very similar problem. It has to do more than what SaaS 1.0 delivered. Not the least of which is integrating everything together, because now we have all these different SaaS things. They're all fragments. They've not come together. So we felt there was a big opportunity for really integrating one more time. And I think AI is a great catalyst for that. It's an amazing catalyst to bring things together, because the only way you can go deliver on, great chain of thought reasoning and an amazing self deflection and reasoning and all this stuff where people don't have to disturb other people to get simple answers, is if you actually brought the customer side of things, the product side of things, the people and work side of things, the users and their session side of things. So we make a case for a knowledge graph, and without this knowledge graphs, we don't feel there's real AI. And I think those are some of the lessons that I took away from my Nutanix experience. Look, I mean, as a CEO, I was acting like a knowledge graph. I was like, hey, I think I know what this function leader does, that function leader does, and what's going on at the project in this department. And I would just try to be the thing that integrates everything. But if anything, I think AI could be a great leveler where any CEO can actually say, look, I can use this Copilot that integrates all my functions into one.
So I want to ask you about a concept that's been coming up a lot recently after Paul Graham wrote about it, was the idea of founder mode. And you're kind of alluding to your philosophy around this. What do you think of this kind of push for a different mindset for founders? Do you think that maybe it's taking it too far?
I think the more things change, the more they remain the same. I look at Larry Ellison today, and he has been in the founder mode for the last 40 years or more, right? I mean, 1977 till now, he's been in a founder mode. I just realized end of yesterday that he's richer than Mark Zuckerberg because of how he's always tried to come from behind and win markets. So I don't think much has changed. It's not a new definition. Of course, when Paul Graham writes something, it becomes news. But at the end of the day, I think the fact that you have to be extremely ownership mindset, this founder mentality, the founder's mentality, is an idea that more and more people in a company need to have. Bain and Company did a really good work on this almost 10 years ago. It's an 18-minute video on YouTube, the founding mentality. And it talks about how, as you try to let go of the company, you fail, and then how you need to get back to having those people who actually have the founders more to grow. So I think this discussion has been going on for a while, and I don't think much has changed in that. I feel like this is where I struggle every day. Is like, have we found the next inner circle? And have we found the next 3 to 5 to 7 people who are the next set of founders in this company? So technically, they might not.
You mentioned that raising up leadership piece.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the hardest piece. And remember, if it goes from 2 of ours, like Manoj and I, to the next 7, 10 of us, all of a sudden the company probably has 4 to 5 times a higher chance of scaling and succeeding as well.
Well, so let me ask you really directly here then. So like, how do you and Manoj go about getting those folks to buy into that level and become these kind of instruments of like almost co-founders themselves?
A big part of it is how they feel like it's their company, which is about, I mean, a lot of it is about letting go of how you are always right because you're a founder, right? I mean, the mother has to go and let go of a child because the teachers know a little bit more, right? And over time, maybe their girlfriend and their fiance knows a little bit more and so on. So I think, this is something that is extremely natural, done well, or not, because tensions get created along the way. Parents fight with teachers about how little teachers know about things and so on. And I think this is the core of it. I have a Pareto on this, like there's 80% of stuff that you let them make mistakes. Don't try to, be right in everything on that 80, because they also have to learn from their mistakes. And on the 20, you need to have another 80-20, which is like maybe 16% of that 100. You go and argue, you spend time and negotiate, you try to tell them why what you're saying probably also needs to have weight, but eventually that rumble will create good decisions. And it's only in the last 4%, which is the 20 of the 20, that you really throw your badge and say, look, I'm telling you, just follow the gut. I have a gut on these things. And what founders fail to realize is that if they don't have this kind of a mindset, then everything is about throwing a badge. That, look, because I'm a founder, I can tell you what is right. I think that primogeniture, this thing that, look, I seeded this, I created this, therefore I know the most, is what really results in unscalable companies. And if you can actually create this thing that, look, people can come from behind and still win and still feel like they're the owner, that's the way you also create ownership in these people, right? In my last company, we had somebody who had never done sales before, and he became the president of the company over those 7-8 years, Sudesh. He
Wow.
also went on to become a CEO of ThoughtSpot. From where he started as a senior director to where he ended, I had to really build a second founder in the company because I'd lost two of my founders between 2010 and 2012. And I think it mattered that he actually said that, look, I can make a lot of these decisions now, and so on. So how you nurture people to become founders again, even though technically they're not, is at the core of this. And, those things that Brené Brown talks about being vulnerable, what does it mean to actually show that vulnerability that, look, let them go make some mistakes along the way is probably at the core of this too.
I've got a couple of her books over my bookshelf behind me,
Yeah.
so
She's amazing.
I'm with you.
She's amazing. And, she talked about some acronyms that I keep in my head about WGLL, what good looks like. And WGLL can be applied to anything in life, people, process, product, i.e. design, and, all sorts of things, what good looks like with respect to relationships, what good looks like with respect to processes and product. Just amazing.
I've maybe been under applying that one. I haven't really thought about it in that perspective. So let's focus in on that product perspective a bit more, because we've talked a lot about people and the importance there. And obviously that's integral to scaling a company. But as you pointed out earlier, there is not this clear dichotomy between product-led growth and sales-led growth, which is really in a lot of ways people-led growth. Like both of these concepts are needed to have a company succeed at the highest levels, and they both work closely together. I've read some work by you and Manoj. Manoj wrote earlier this year a great blog about designing for moments of serendipity within the product and enabling those, letting users make these like deep connections in their brain through like happy magic they experience. And then obviously you've talked already today about built-in AI and building for that scale versus kind of the bolt-on AI that some other companies are experiencing. What's your perspective on how you think through AI-driven design and how DevRev is designing for the future?
When TikTok came out, it took the world by storm. And the reason was simple. It was not syntactic, it was semantic. It was really understanding what your taste looked like. I think the fact that it was a great recommendation engine without you having to even ask it a question was at the core of its virality. I mean, obviously everybody else copied after that. Now, whether or not their neural networks were as powerful as TikTok, I think time will tell. But I think that's the core of software going forward. Like, can it really be serendipitous? Can it really go and be the best recommendation engine? Can it know more about me than I think I do about myself? Many of these things surface up from the subconscious, and software, and it does get creepy sometimes because it's trying to collect everything about you. But, if you keep that privacy guard aside, especially if you're willing to actually let it know everything about you, I think in B2B, there's a big opportunity for serendipity, for recommendations, for letting it tell you, like, we're dealing with analytics for now. And analytics has been a great struggle, in terms of what insights mean. And up until now, there have been big teams of people who actually do data pipelining, massaging work, then warehousing work, which is going and summarizing and aggregating and putting jobs around it, and finally creating visualization, i.e. dashboards and reports on top of it. Millions are spent in even a fairly small company, millions is spent every year on data alone. But if you think about it, at the core of it, it really is a search problem. Many people are building these widgets and visualizations, things like that. And many a time, I want to know what others have seen. After I asked one question, maybe the next 3 questions have to be serendipitous, where the recommender actually tells me, by the way, this is the next thing that they've asked, or this is the next drill down that they actually looked at. People who did this also did that, also made Google a little bit more, usable. In fact, if anything, that's the level of serendipity that we actually craved from all search engines, and analytics is now a search problem. So I think what we had to do was to think a lot about design of these kind of systems. And we're still scratching the surface, but I can tell you that, at the core of what B2B will look like in the next 20 years, it has to be more consumer grade. It has to be more TikTok-like. It has to be design worthy and real time. In the last 10 years, the best that we have done with B2B is collaboration with Slack. That's the best. It's the epitome of design is collaboration, because it has transcended the departmental boundaries. It's like, well, we can get anybody across all departments to come and work together. If you don't bring that to business software, we have failed. Because the problem with Slack and Teams is that they're very unstructured. All they are is system of engagement. But you got to bring that into your tickets, into your issues, into your enhancements, into your conversations, into the way these chatbots are actually working between users and the company and so on. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of Slack-like magic that needs to be brought to business software. And we feel like that's the missing piece that will take, this right now, the way we're talking about, software and work and people, like, are they willing to work as hard and things like that? We've got to make it delightful. And both AI and design can actually bring that element of delight to business software.
I love that idea of delight in business software because it's something we often don't think about enough. Another concept that's really important, which you mentioned there, was privacy. And my understanding is that DevRev is also applying kind of the principle of least privilege, which is a cybersecurity concept that limits a user's access to the minimum level of permissions needed to complete a task, to help protect that privacy and make the what you're doing more secure. Is that correct?
Yeah. And by the way, these are lessons from Nutanix too, because we kind of took longer to actually think hard about principle of least privilege. Because sometimes when you're building simple, easy to use products, you tend to forget that at some level in the enterprise, they will have confidentiality, privacy, integrity, all sorts of things to actually go and think hard about. Because it's not one company, it's small companies and larger company, and every little department or group actually wants its autonomy and its privacy as well. So we had to really left shift a lot of that thinking at DevRel to really think hard about security. We think they've built something that's even better than the best authorization engine that's out there. Google proposed Zanzibar, which people think is extremely fine-grained and so on. And again, the moment you start thinking about fine-grained security, how do you make it easy to use, is as much of a challenge and opportunity as anything else. So yeah, I think privacy has played a big role. Security has played a big role. We're also thinking about multi-region because, look, the world is deglobalizing. And in a more deglobalized world, you have to really think about the laws of the land more now than 5 years ago. When cloud was actually coming out, they probably didn't have to worry about those things. And now every country worth its salt is thinking about data residency. And this is the place where a lot of SaaS 1.0 is struggling. Look at Zendesk and Service Cloud. They can't go punch a cloud every 15 days because they're built with private data centers in mind, or they're built with large AWS thinking in mind, as opposed to, can you miniaturize this and bring it to a country? Like, I don't know, it could even be that I have a data center in Saudi Arabia and another region in Israel, or wherever the hyperscalers are, one in southern Japan. We can do that, and SaaS 2.0 has to be able to go and miniaturize itself, because that's what the new cloud's definition really is.
You brought up a couple of great things there I want to dive into, but let's start with that deglobalization piece, because to your point, we're seeing that happen around data and regulations. We're seeing regions and countries really get serious about keeping data in their region. Supply chains, look at the CHIPS Act here in the United States, and some of the concerns there around hardware, but it's not happening with people. In fact, the opposite effect has happened, particularly since 2020, as everyone was kind of pushed online and remote. We're seeing global recruitment. We're seeing more and more hiring across different regions. Even companies that are doing return to office are trying to leverage this massive talent pool globally. How do you see these trends kind of conflicting with each other?
Well, more than conflicting, I feel like work and life are weaving in together better than we had done before. Now, it started with video, and the fact that video is now a commodity was not a commodity before 2020. WebEx, most of us didn't actually think of video as the first class thing with WebEx. But in the last 5, 7 years, with the advent of public clouds and big backhaul networks and client-side caching, HTML5, there's a lot that's happened with video in the enterprise. But it has to go deeper, and this is where I really believe the knowledge graph needs to be coming in, because now the hallways are gone. You're not going to bump into people in the hallways. So what's the digital version of it? The digital version of it is what we call the knowledge graph: the customer, the product, the people, the work, the user, the sessions and activity. We need to bring this new sort of temple, the building where everybody actually lives. And Slack was that, has become that in many ways around collaboration and channels and things like that. But I think we need to think about AI as the new sort of place where people, it's the new public, say, central public square or something. You think of the place where people congregate is no more the I would say the atrium of a building. There's no more atriums, atria where you can actually get people to congregate. A lot of these things need to happen digitally. Now, there is definitely this move towards, the big cities have become too expensive. We need to really do this in a way that can be best of both worlds. But along the way, I think there is a little bit of a schism between the West and the East, I would say. I would say that emerging economies are showing more hunger in many of these things. Saying, look, we have nothing and we'd like to do so much more. The experience of the West and the youth of the East, we need to mix these things together as well. I think, and the college folks here coming from, let's say, American colleges, they have to also basically say, look, the world is flat. We need to really go compete with, this amount of hunger that's come to develop, because video is everywhere and collaboration is everywhere and the knowledge graph can now be spread across. We will actually see a lot of this stuff where the world has actually become flatter. I mean, that's one of the reasons why DevRev actually had 7 offices in the first 3 years. I could never have imagined this at Nutanix. It took us 4 years to even start a second center of excellence out of Bangalore. And this time around on day 1, we actually had to think about Slovenia and India. And then day 2, we had to think about Argentina. Talent is everywhere right now. And we have to think about this as a great leveler. And at the same time, the fact that it's become as hard as it was in the 80s. Like, 80s were not easy for tech jobs here in the US because software is coming out of its hardware root. And in the 90s, early 90s, I think until the internet bubble, I think the software job was not easy to come. And I think we're back to that where again, by the way, hardware is very important now. GPUs, as you know, as the new revolution. So really to get competitive again is by going back to the 80s.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I think one of the undervalued changes that happened in the 80s was also the investment in particular computer science programs in certain cities. Whether we're thinking about like Stanford and Berkeley, or we're thinking about, University of Washington, Seattle, and what Microsoft invested into that program, and Palo Alto in particular. And so we've seen, obviously, like we've kind of begun to understand that to have a great startup community, a city that has a ton of talent, you need that education level. We've seen the internet start to democratize some of that education and bring it global. And we've also seen other cities and countries across the world make those into educational investments. And now to your point, we're seeing this next layer of, okay, great, we have this huge cloud push. And now we're really going all in on GPUs because it's going to be fueling this next layer of AI. And the capital investments we're seeing from particularly major players, the Apples, the Metas, the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world, it's really crazy to see the scale. And I'm very interested to see whether open source GPU power becomes something that actually really moves forward, and whether like the Llama approach or something else really gets some precedence, or whether it stays very much in-house and people are looking for this monopolistic win.
Well, I mean, you know this as much as anyone else, that centralized architectures eventually decentralize. And the big reason is access and economics. When I say access, I mean, can I run it on my laptop? That's how open source came about. Like, well, I don't want to pay for a cloud provider's ability to really do this. And latency matters too, because if I'm on a free version of OpenAI and that takes 15 seconds for me to get back an answer because I'm on this unprioritized queue, developers will find better ways to do that. And they say, look, I can just use the Llama 8 billion model. And by the way, that's really good. And I can fine tune it and so on and so forth. So the 5 years out, architecture is well understood. It will be open source, running on laptops, because the laptops will have a lot of good GPU as well. Now, in the next 5 years, maybe next 5 to 7 to 10 years, I would say that open source will copy a lot as well. Like, the good thing here is that Meta has a lot of these things going on in their consumer cloud too. So they're learning a lot about languages. They understand a lot of languages. So I'm actually rooting for open source at some point, to become as ubiquitous, because I personally have believed a lot in edge computing. If anything, the way we've done our analytics product and the way we've kept it democratized and just as accessible to a premium client of ours as it is for a large enterprise paying us millions of dollars, is by using their laptops. Like, hey, we got to use their laptop as much as possible, because I can burn so much money into centralized data warehouses, for example, to do analytics. We got to really figure out the way Excel popularized or the way Tableau popularized, where the data was on the laptop. And now people could do things so much faster rather than going back with a round trip to a server, and that to an expensive server like a centralized data warehouse. So our analytics architecture, for example, I mean, there's nobody that even comes close. The way we ship data from, these different systems of record, the way we bring it to a centralized data warehouse, the way we crunch the numbers and summarize and aggregate, bring it back into AWS and then bring it to a laptop in a highly secure way, and then make people do things in the laptop, I think is the essence of, and not just laptop, but eventually mobile phones too. I mean, voice to text, text to voice, all this stuff will actually happen on the edge device. And we want to that's the only way to really democratize AI.
I mean, it's interesting you bring this up because, we're recording this a few weeks before the episode's going to come out, but OpenAI just in the last, 24 hours has announced their new OpenAI O1 preview based off of Strawberry, where they're actually using essentially slower thinking from the AI to get to a deeper answer. So it's going to be fascinating to see these kind of two trends, to your point, where it's like, hey, we want to have deeper models that can take their time and get to like a more well thought out, intuitive answer that has deeper understanding behind it and gives us a more extensive approach. And then we're going to see, the digital employees, the agents, the agentic AI approach, where it's like, hey, like I need this digital employee to do things regularly. And then we're also going to see the kind of, I'll call it the co-pilot approach of like, hey, let me leverage this thing and it needs to be extremely fast and low latency, and, to your point, available locally. So those trends and how they interact is going to be fascinating to see over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And look, the idea of slow thinking, it doesn't have to be a pause of 15 seconds. I mean, even the most deep experts, they don't pause for 15 seconds for the next answer. So we should hopefully try to aim for 2-second pause. Like, hey, let me think about this over 2 seconds. And
I think we'll get there.
Yeah.
It may take some time.
And this is where I think open source could be very helpful as well, because not everybody can afford the tier 1 enterprise licensing OpenAI to really go build that 2-second latency. And look, for most startups, latency matters. Actually, for all startups, latency must matter. Because if the end user experiences that I don't know what's going on and 15 seconds is just too much, I mean, Google tried for a 300 millisecond response, and that's why they became so popular. I think if things are in the realm of a few seconds, we are already violating the principles of attention spans.
Well, I could honestly talk the future of technology and kind of hear from your insights for another hour here, but I know we're getting close to the end of this episode, and I want to make sure to ask you a couple key questions here at the end, because it sounds like you've got some exciting news around DevRev's leadership in AI to share with us, Dheeraj. Can you tell us a bit about what that news is?
Well, the big news that I am very proud of is to really get a leader for the company at a board level. Our first external board member is somebody from the world of design. His name is George Pechnik, and he is one of the special people who's worked a lot in consumer companies and also in enterprise companies like Microsoft. And then finally at New York Times, where he was really getting a lot of the design experience of New York Times. I mean, I'm in awe of the New York Times. I always wanted to really get in touch with somebody who had done so much work, especially look at New York Times in the last 10 years, the way they've really redefined themselves with design and now, games and one of the most popular engagement sort of apps out there, New York Times apps. So I really more wanted to actually think about how we started design because it's a counterfoil, and I always thought that when the world is talking AI, 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 we have to think about the opposite of AI, which is UI and UX. That if you
Yeah.
can bring this well, then you can make AI invisible. It's like the way Warren Buffett talks about it. When the world is greedy, you should be fearful. When the world is fearful, you should be greedy. So in this day of a lot of AI washing, we figured we had to do a really good job of design. And hence, George Fetchning, I think, is going to really be a perfect foil for a lot of the, deep technical thinking that a lot of our developers bring, but also a lot of what our design team will need to really be a first and equals for. We had to really think hard about this for the last 2.5 years because up until now, we didn't have a board. We actually had just two of us, Manoj and I, on the board, and now we're an external board member who really, is carrying the torch of how to make AI actionable and useful.
And this speaks to your philosophy of investing in people and building out excellence within your team and within your advisor set too. So I see how this aligns to kind of the lessons from your previous journey and also how you're thinking about future product philosophy, which my understanding is DevRev has an exciting upcoming conference with some new platform announcements that's coming up here about a week after this episode
Oh,
premieres.
absolutely. I mean, I'm going to spill the beans a little bit right now, but at the core of this is to not just, this idea of change, because AI, people are afraid to say this is bolt-on or the built-in. And we're like going and making case for like, everybody thinks it's bolt-on, you have to really build it in. But building it in means that you have to replace things. I mean, there's no easy ways to actually go, transplant a brain from the outside to make one body work. In many ways, you have to think about this whole thing holistically. So while we will talk about what AI design can do to business, but customer support at large, product management, customer support being next to each other, but also what do agents look like? What does incident management look like? What does insights mean in the enterprise beyond search? What does search itself mean? And how can you commoditize search to the point where you don't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually make enterprise search work? I think last but not the least, to talk about case study, how did we do multi-million-dollar transitions out of Zendesk and Salesforce Service Cloud and in the future? How do we really make people think about the enterprise worthiness of next generation platforms? How being cloud native, being AI native is the only way for people to really step away from the treadmill that they've been on. Because most of these lines of business leaders, they've been on a treadmill and they're all hoping for what will change. And the only way you can actually bring change is when you think hard about not just slapping something on, like I slapped on AI and now I can get a promotion, and instead think hard about what do I need to really change.
I love it. Well, Dheeraj, I'll make sure that our listeners are paying attention here and say, like, check out the upcoming conference Effortless by DevRev on October 17th in Santa Clara for these new product announcements and so much more from Manoj and Dheeraj and the whole team at DevRev. We'll link the event in the episode description, or you can find it at devrev.ai/events. Dheeraj, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. I think our listeners will benefit a ton from your insights. Hopefully it's going to inspire some folks in our audience to take the next step as a founder or to grow their careers or, become a co-founder in name and spirit. So thank you so much again for joining us on the show. And for those tuning in, you can find this whole conversation on YouTube across all your podcasting apps. And don't forget to leave us a rating when you have a chance. Thanks, Dheeraj.
Thank you.